A Long History of Crime. By Anna von Reitz. Information provided to H.E. Cardinal Mamberti and the Vatican Chancery Court in regard to our claims, March 5, 2005, January 19, 2023, in Seek. Both the Roman civil law and the ecclesiastical law condemn fraud, and it is universally held to taint everything that it later touches. When we attempt to get to the root of this most recent round of lies, war-mongering, and greed, the trail leads back to King Henry VIII, and a brainchild of his administration, the Enclosure Acts, originally spelled as Inclosure, which started the long trek toward the total destruction of individual property rights in England, without any authority to do so. Henry VIII and his daughter got caught up in other issues and didn't carry forward with their plan, but King James I seized upon it with a vengeance. More than 5,200 separate Enclosure Acts were passed in England from 1604 to 1914, and all of them were fraudulent for a number of reasons. These enclosures were land grabs, in which commonly held community land rights were stripped from local lords and freemen, and dumped into the ownership of public trusts controlled by the Commonwealth, otherwise known as the territorial government. All the kings and queens supporting these actions were acting in fraud themselves. All of them were acting as the Pope's overseer of Commonwealth lands, and the enclosures benefited them in undisclosed ways, increasing their personal wealth and power as more and more land came under their control, and the immovable estates sitting on the land also came under their control, which then gave rise to the chair of the estates, yet another undisclosed royal office. Their gross conflict of interest, like their undisclosed offices within the Holy Roman hierarchy, and the methods used to obtain their ends, all served as a template for further fraud and for undermining the public government with their so-called private government agendas. The parallels between their frauds in England and their frauds in America are exact. Henry II becomes a king in France, and stands as an equal among the many kings of England created by the settlement of the Norman conquest, but then passes himself off as the King of England, without a royal grant, a fraud that was the source of his argument with Thomas of Becket. Henry II, like his forebears, is serving as the Pope's overseer of Commonwealth lands in England, and getting rich off his share of the tithes, an undisclosed conflict of interest the whole time he is claiming to be King of England. We see the same story mirrored by Abraham Lincoln, a president of the British Crown Municipal Corporation subcontractor housed in the District of Columbia, passing himself off as the president owed to this country. He, too, is a man with an undisclosed conflict of interest, secretly serving as an officer of the Crown at the same time he passes himself off as serving in an American public office, an office he has been prohibited from occupying for many years prior to his spoof. The perpetrators in England set up a public interest trust scam implemented by the Enclosure Acts, to seize upon the common law lands and the land rights of the local freemen and lords, with the result that these assets were placed in trusts controlled by the Commonwealth, also known as the territorial government, instead. This secretly serves to increase the wealth and coercive power of the Pope's overseer of Commonwealth lands, and gives him or her more collateral that can be borrowed against. This also unlawfully converts the political status of freemen owning freeholds of common law land, into the status of being tenants of a Commonwealth trust. The same basic shtick was employed in America. The perpetrators led by Lincoln claimed a custodial interest, that is, a public trust interest, in our land and property, and justified it using the chaos created by the mercenary conflict they themselves engendered in breach of trust on our shores. Just as with the Enclosure Acts, this merely presumed to exist custodial interest allowed the perpetrators to put American assets into public trusts that were then administered by the territorial government, with the same exact results as the Enclosure Acts in England. The perpetrators gained wealth and coercive power and collateral to borrow against, while the free and independent Americans in possession of their land grants and patents were unlawfully converted into tenants of a municipal trust. We are here to tell you that we are not tenants of any municipal trust, and our land and our property interests are not subject to any custodial relationship with the treasonous territorial government represented by the United States of America, Incorporated, a criminal municipal corporation housed in the District of Columbia, or housed in any other place, including the present iteration of this corporation that has sought protection and charter in India. We publish and declare all these lies and fraud schemes perpetuated in breach of trust, so that they and the legal system that has been used to bear profit from these acts of treason, non-disclosure, and fraud, may all be nullified and removed from our sight. Both the British Crown-operated municipal corporation housed in the District of Columbia and the city-operated municipal corporation housed therein, and all their enclaves worldwide, stand forfeit for their crimes against us, their loyal employers, and against all of mankind, for at least the last 300 years. The legal system and the bar attorneys and their bar associations which have served as the means to create, perpetuate, and enforce these gigantic fraud schemes, must go, never to return. Our ancestors called them merchants of deceit, and our own experience confirms this, as these professionals have been willingly and in many cases knowingly administering and profiting from these crimes against the living people and their national governments. We wish for all incorporated franchises of the bar associations and their members to be liquidated for the benefit of their victims. We wish for the bar associations and their teachings and form of law to be uprooted and for their coded language, to be outlawed for any purpose whatsoever. Our official language is English. Any provider of any service in this country needs to speak English and speak it without double meanings and layers of deceit intended to mislead, defraud, or obfuscate using professional jargon and codes. The reform of the Admiralty begun circa 1756 has self-evidently failed, together with all the municipal corporations which have failed to be reliable vendors and service providers. The officers of these municipal corporations have often acted as petty despots, parasites, and thugs. We wish for the remaining duties of the Admiralty courts, which have allowed them to entertain fictitious salvage claims and led to the equally fictitious hypothecation of debt against both living people and national governments, to be removed from them. They have grossly abused these empowerments intended to address actual salvage operations at sea for criminal purposes and provided another means to embezzle unjust enrichment from our country via manipulation of tax claims as excise tariffs owed on seamen's wages. This obvious fraud, charging hypothecated debt against the wages of non-existent British merchant mariners and enforcing this rubbish as an excise on seamen's wages, speaks for itself. We wish for the forfeiture of all assets associated with the legal system and the return of all our public property, including but not limited to the records, courthouses, jails, prisons, and equipment associated with these operations. We wish for the release of all nonviolent offenders. We wish to return to the simple and moral common law requiring that actual injury to people or property must exist as a condition for crime to exist. Clearly, constructive fraud and games of legal supposition based on deceitful language practices and undisclosed contracts to promote illegal and unlawful property conversion and confiscation in the name of vacuous public interest claims, insurance fraud, and various substitution schemes have been a very long-term occupation of the white-collar pirates responsible. We must recognize that these crimes, although created on paper, are enforced with guns, and the inland piracy involved is a capital crime prohibited by both the Geneva and Hague Conventions, as well as violating the canon law on the part of the magistrates who fail to dissolve the public trusts. The immense fraud and unlawful injuries perpetuated by these municipal corporations violates the Ecclesiastical Law that allows these legal fiction entities to exist at all. This is far from the first time these issues have been addressed. The Justinian deception being reprised by Parse syntax is 1500 years old, the repeat of the Bottomry bonds scandal, aside from the fact that the modern version is using people as ships and their estates as cargo, is 220 years old. The insurance fraud is as old as the concept of life insurance. The phony public interest claims began in earnest in 1666. The use of executors de son tort followed, and the substitution schemes, with respect to both persons and money, have been common as dirt since the kingdoms of Egypt and Samaria. The illegal and unlawful secret occupation of Britain and most of Western Europe, the former Commonwealth, the United States, Japan and many other countries by commercial mercenaries acting as territorial forces, men under contract to provide good faith service and taking their pay from the pockets of their victims, has been known since the days of the Hanseatic League, when German merchants and German merchant bankers used similar methods to undermine the national governments. Does anyone think it is coincidental that the architects of this situation are German investment bankers? Bankers who have cashiered the wealth of Britain and controlled both the private wealth of the German-British royal family since 1840 and the British Crown since 1763? They've done it before and they are doing it again, with collusion from British and Chinese co-conspirators, and nobody can pretend that we don't know what they are doing and how they are doing it, because we have seen it all before. This is why we have known Nazis occupying top positions of trust in NATO, INC, and DoD, INC, municipal corporations, and this is why we have war in the Ukraine, and organizations like the WEF, INC. which are just more municipal corporations and franchises, committing crime for profit. This is why we have all these evils rampant and in our faces, again. We failed to recognize them for who and what they are in the immediate aftermath of wars they have created for profit, but we've caught up to them now, and our eyes are wide open. We've learned our lessons and have no need to repeat them. We wish for these guilty municipal corporations, all of them, globally, to be forfeit, so as to best benefit the security and well-being of the national governments and the living people of this planet. These municipal corporations have sought profit mindlessly, for the sake of profit only. They have worshipped their own delusions and the works of their own hands, and their idols are all dead. They are no match for the living God who now seeks his vengeance. Let the full weight of their sins against the innocent rest on them. Issued by Anna Maria Riesinger, Fiduciary. The United States of America in care of Box 520994 Big Lake, Alaska 99652. April 15, 2023,